Greetings, everybody. As I was putting together materials for the second part of this week's class, I found myself writing a lot, and I decided I'd give all of you maybe a break from reading a lot of verbiage, and maybe give myself a break from writing a lot, and kind of break things up with a video and a PowerPoint slide the way that I would do if we were in class. And actually, the points I want to make in this PowerPoint presentation work better if I can kind of walk them through with you and explain each one. So I'm going to do that. PowerPoint slides will be on the Moodle site if you want to go back and take a look at them. So give me a second. I'm going to share my screen so that you don't have to look at me through this whole thing. It should be all set. Okay. Great. So I wanted to talk about the convention, make a couple of points, make some observations. As I said in the item that's already posted on Moodle, I really appreciated your comments. I think we're off to a good start, and we're going to have some great discussions. But I wanted to put things somewhat into context for you. And the first thing I wanted to talk about, or just remind everybody, I'm not sure how much people know about different political history, but throughout most of U.S. history, the candidates actually were selected at the conventions. They were what they call brokered or open conventions, where they would start, the party leaders would meet for 4 days, and they really wouldn't know at the beginning who was going to win the nomination. If you watched either the Republican or Democratic roll calls, they were mostly a ceremonial thing. But I remember some of the first conventions that I watched, you would actually be counting the votes, and you wouldn't know who was going to win until a certain candidate hit that magic number. So it made the conventions themselves a bit more exciting. That's kind of changed over the years. In recent times, I would say I kind of remember in 1980 there was still some contention about who was going to be, the Democratic candidate. But for the most part, in our lifetimes, the nominee has been known by the time the convention begins. So there's not much drama in selecting that. They used to, at one point, hold out the vice presidential nominee until the convention, so that would be something people would look for. But even the last 2 or 3 campaign cycles, we've known who the vice president is. So the official nomination does take place at the convention, but it's mostly ceremonial. So as a result, the nature and the purpose of conventions has changed. And what they do is each convention plays to the party's base. They become rallies. They're places for networking and things like that. As I mentioned in some of my postings, I'm from New Jersey. New Jersey is on a cycle where the governor's election always takes place the year after the presidential election. So whenever I covered a national political convention, sometimes the bigger story for our readers was what was happening in the governor's race, because you saw a lot of jockeying, people playing for support and things like that. They also tend to energize, the party's base. You can see here is a picture of a Trump supporter, some Biden supporters. So that's what happened. You bring a lot of people together. They hear from the candidates. They hear from supporters. They get all excited about the campaign, and then they go out and work to get, to try to get their candidate elected. So what they don't do is convince undecided voters. I don't think there's too many people who watched the Democratic convention or watched the Republican convention and said, wow, I saw this, I'm going to vote for Trump, I'm going to vote for Biden. Most of the people who watch the conventions, who take part in the conventions, are party loyalists. So they have their minds made up. The key to winning elections really lies with undecided voters. Here's a map of the US, and there's a bunch of maps like this showing red states, blue states. They vary from a bit, but in general, before the election starts, we know that a bunch of states are going to vote Republican, and Trump's going to get all those electoral votes. A bunch of states are going to vote Democrat, and Biden's going to get their electoral votes. And the real key to victory is going to be in the undecided states, which you can see on this map are the gray states. The light blue are leaning Democrat, the light red are leaning Republican. But the voters who are going to determine who the next president is pretty much are in those states that are gray. And that's true in just about every election. When you start out local elections, state elections, there are a certain number of people who are going to vote Democrat regardless. A certain number of people are going to vote Republican regardless. But there's more people undecided than there are in either party. So, the key to victory is to convince those undecided voters to vote for your candidate, whether it be for a mayor, a governor, or in this case, a president. Just talking a bit about what I've seen so far in the Republican convention and what I saw last week in the Democratic convention. One of the interesting aspects to me was what I call the counter strategies, what the other party was doing. On Thursday of the week of the Democratic convention, the night that Joe Biden was giving his acceptance speech, which is kind of, the culmination of the convention, President Trump arranged to do an interview with Sean Hannity on Fox News. Pretty much, I think he tried to go head to head, but as it worked out, Biden talked later. But nevertheless, it was Biden's big night, and he was kind of stealing some of his thunder, and also giving his base, his supporters, something that they could, turn to why Biden was getting all this attention. And then, some of you may have seen Sunday around 6, 7 o'clock on the eve of the start of the Republican convention, the president and the FDA chief made an announcement announcing what they termed as a major breakthrough in the treatment for the coronavirus. Some people have been skeptical of that, but regardless, he got a lot of attention. It gave them something, gave them some momentum, going into the convention, because, the president obviously has been criticized, for his role in the coronavirus. He can agree with that, disagree with it, but it was something he was aware of, his people were aware of. So before the convention even started, they made a point to get this one proposal out on the table. By contrast, Democrats weren't sitting quiet either. On Monday, when the Republican convention started, they announced the names of a whole bunch of Republican congressmen, former Republican congressmen, other officials who were going to vote Democrat, vote for Joe Biden. Again, it's the first night of the Republican convention, so they're trying to steal some of that thunder for Democrats. Also, on that same day, Letitia James, who's the state attorney general here in New York State, announced some new developments in an investigation of Eric Trump and the Trump Organization. Again, putting somewhat of a damper on the festivities of the Republican convention. Now, attorneys, attorney generals, U.S. attorneys will tell you that they announce these things when they're ready. There's no political motivations, but it does seem pretty coincidental that this one became ready on the first day of the Republican convention. I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt, but I'll just throw that out there in terms of timing. It worked very well for the Democrats. Last thing I want to, one more thing, formats. There was a big difference in the way the Democrats presented their convention and the way the Republicans are presenting theirs. And I'm not saying one way is better than the other. I actually be interested to hear your thoughts on it. But the Democrats kind of embraced the fact that it was a virtual convention. They used some different techniques. You can see here's a big, Zoom, response. And there were smaller interviews, there were videos. Many of the speakers, sat in, like in their offices and gave speeches where they were talking, directly to the people who were viewing. By contrast, the Republican convention pretty much has looked like a standard convention. It's people standing at a podium, giving a speech, even though there's no audience. And actually, they did have a small live audience for some of the events. So, you have the Democrats saying, here's a new format, here's a different way to reach people, and they made some changes. The Republicans are sticking with the tried and true method. I think each method might work well for each party's base, but there's really a stark contrast there. And it's not absolute. There were some Democratic speeches that were people standing behind a podium that looked traditional. And I've seen a few virtual elements, the Republican convention, and we still have 2 days to go on that. But that's at least my initial observation, from the two. And it might be something we discuss later in the semester about what the long-term impact is of having a virtual convention. Might it be something that we see more of when we have the next presidential election in 2024? So this is actually the last point I wanted to make. And you'll see up there in bold the word spectacle. And I just wanted to kind of introduce you to that concept. And spectacle is a big part of politics. We have all these things with bells and whistles. The picture there is a picture of the State of the Union address. And State of the Union address, almost always given in January, is the president talking to Congress, talking to the Senate, Supreme Court, Cabinet. It's filled with people. There's usually some guests that get shout outs, during the speech. And constitutionally, the only thing a president is required to do, it says from time to time he must report to Congress on his activities. I don't have the exact wording there. So technically, the president could fulfill his or her, if we have a female president someday, responsibility by just sending a memo or an email to Congress saying, here's what we've done, here is the State of the Union. But it's involved into these massive spectacles, and people come to expect that, instead of the president just, sending out a memo to Congress, he's going to call everybody there in person. And it's been like this pretty much, I wouldn't say from the very start of the nation, but, for most of the nation, we have this. And as I said, we as a people tend to love these spectacles, or, we just kind of take for granted that that's what they're going to be. The conventions largely are spectacles. At least they've become spectacles. They're no longer a place where the candidates are selected. That's all done beforehand. So they become, as some people have termed them just large infomercials for the political parties. Debates are a lot like this too. As we watch the presidential debates, which start the end of September, you're going to see a lot of what some of you picked up on in the Jason Miller interview. Candidates aren't going to really answer the questions. They're going to go in there with their set talking points, and they're going to find a way to twist the answer to their benefit. That's kind of the way debates have come. I've written things in the past saying, debates, speeches are, kind of outmoded, that, they've had their time. I think there's some truth to that. I read an interesting article, and I may share it with you guys later in the semester, by David Greenberg, who's a professor at Rutgers. He actually was one of the professors I took classes from when I was getting my PhD. And he said, the real value in debates isn't what the candidates say, because you're not really going to learn a lot about them, or you're not going to learn more about where they stand than you would from just reading their position papers. The real value of debates is they get people excited and involved in the election. So, people who may not have been paying attention, all of a sudden September 9th is going to come. All the networks are going to have, coverage. They're going to show the debates live. You're going to see your comments on them. So that the real value is just that it's something that gets people thinking about the election, gets them a bit more focused, hopefully gets them to make a more intelligent and informed choice at the voting booth. So towards that end, there's an article which actually I'm going to base some of the quiz questions on this week. It's about what's termed low information voters. And it's not a pejorative term. It's just a term that is used to more or less indicate that a lot of people who vote don't really have the information that they need. And it's not really a fault of theirs. People tend not to follow politics. I think made that point when I opened the course, and even in seeing a lot of your comments, that people tend not to focus on campaigns and elections, so that the people, when they go to the polls, maybe don't have the best set of facts or the information. You don't have to have that. In our democracy, certain requirements you have to vote. But it's an interesting concept. It's written by, it's an article written by a man named Peter Hamby, and you can read it. It's from back in January, and I'm going to form a couple of questions. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on, his theory and how his theory may have changed between January and now, when we have the pandemic. I know a number of you in your comments on the conventions kind of speculated, are people going to be more focused on the elections this year because, people have been stuck at home, so they've had more time to follow the news, to follow politics. So that's where we are. So as I said, I wanted to do this in a bit of a different format than I did on Monday. I'll probably do it a few more times over the semester, but thanks for listening. And again, thanks for getting the class off to a good start. And let me just stop the share. There I am. So everybody, I will be back in touch with you. Actually, Thursday morning, I will post the reading and the quiz questions. I'm around for comments, but as we've done the first week, 4 o'clock Monday, I'll post a bunch of new things for next week's class. So with that, I know it's only Wednesday as I'm recording this, but since I won't see or talk with everybody as a group until Monday, I wish everybody a good rest of the week and a great weekend to start the semester.